November 28th. Happy birthday. Monsieur Bessin. What's that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
26, you're right.
I hope the birthday wishes doesn't take out of my time by 30 seconds. So,
Go ahead.
thank you. And Mr. Chair, I want to thank our witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General for being here and for the great work that they do on behalf of Canadians and behalf of us as parliamentarians in making sure that dollars and programs are fitting the mandate of the Government of Canada. Now, I want to concentrate on Chapter 3, on the fighter jet study. And it was, as we know, early last week, there was a report that through access to information that the term capability gap never existed before 2016. And I noticed in your report that you never used the term capability gap. So I'm wondering, in the time that you did your research, if capability gap exists in the lingo that's used by the Royal Canadian Air Force, or is it strictly a misnomer used for political spin? Ms. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So in 2016, the government changed the policy requirement of how it wanted national defence to meet its NORAD and NATO commitments. In the past, national defence risk managed between NORAD and NATO. In 2016, it changed the requirement. It asked national defence to meet NORAD at its highest level and also meet NATO at the same time. That did create a gap that meant that national defence had to increase its production of aircraft by 23%. The gap, however...
Is the correct term actually operational availability, not a capability gap? Because you do talk about combat capability, which is different than operational availability.
What we're referring to, Mr. Chair, in the report actually is a shortage in pilots and technicians, and that's where essentially we found that there was a need to address. So with respect to that, National Defence was facing a shortage in pilots and techs prior to the 2016 change, and the change in 2016 actually made the shortage worse.
Right, and so in your opinion, as it's laid out in paragraph 32 of report number 3, you actually say purchasing interim aircraft does not bring national defence closer to consistently meeting the new operational requirement introduced in 2016. That almost reads like a recommendation. Why wasn't it?
The decision to buy Australian jets or to buy jets is actually a decision of the government, not a departmental decision. So we don't comment on the policy decisions of the government. We looked at the implementation of the policy themselves. What we found was that by buying jets, Australian jets, that wasn't going to help with the problems that they actually faced with respect to the shortage of pilots, techs, and combat capability.
It has been suggested to me that earlier on in the study that the Auditor General was looking at actually making that recommendation of not going ahead with the purchase of an interim fighter fleet.
We reported the recommendations that we have, one on pilots and technicians, and one on looking at investments in combat capability.
Would the Office of the Auditor General be looking at potentially following up on the study as it relates to the purchase of interim fighter fleet?
We're always looking at the risks and what audit work we need to work on in the future. So I would say that all topics are open for audit.
Do you believe that the policy change, when exactly, you talked about introduced in 2016, when was the exact date, or do you have that information offhand, that the new operational requirements were brought into place?
I'm going to say late December 2016, late 2016.
Late December 2016. Do you feel that because of the combination of both not enough pilots and technicians and aircrew, along with the change in operational requirements, is creating a crisis that wasn't necessary?
National Defence has carried out its analysis to determine what it needs, and it identified pilots and techs as being a need, and so those are the efforts that National Defence has to take now.
So when I look at in paragraph 52 in the conclusion, it said National Defence has not done enough, in part because of factors outside of its control. Is the policy changes part of those factors outside of its control? The
two factors that we mentioned in that paragraph are one around the replacement fleet, the fact that they've been waiting for a replacement fleet for a while, and that that has not helped them in terms of getting the techs, pilots, and combat capability. And the second reason is the policy change in 2016.
Do you believe that National Defence and the Government of Canada doesn't need to spend $470 million to buy used, rusted out old Australian fighter jets?
Once again, that's a decision of the government, and we're only looking at the implementation of the policy and not the decisions themselves.
Much more time do I have? 2 minutes. So let's drill down on the combat capability, because that is something, my understanding is that did the Office of the Auditor General actually fly down to look at the condition of the Australians' F-18s?
No, we did not look at the condition of the Australian.
Did your office look at the condition based upon reports that came into National Defence?
We did not look at anything related to the condition of the Australian jets.
Okay. It's my understanding that the planes that Australia bought are just slightly older. They're a different block than the fleet that we currently have here in Canada that we bought from 1980 to 1982. And I understand that upgrading them to our standards is going to be quite a bit of work. When you look at the costs of upgrades, especially as you look at combat capability, our fighter fleet hasn't been upgraded in 10 years. I understand the Australians are even longer, plus the airframes are slightly different, so it makes plug and play a little bit more challenging. Has that at all weighed into the overall factors on whether or not the purchase is rational?
We looked at what it was going to cost to buy and operate the plane, so it's going to be about $471 million to buy and modify them. National Defence Analysis has demonstrated that they can modify them to be the same or very similar to the Canadian fleet, and they're going to spend about $558 million to operate them.
So, going back to paragraph 32, it says purchasing interim aircraft does not bring National Defence closer to consistently matching the new operational requirement. The government, after this report, after they were aware of the report, of course, and was tabled last week, they announced that they have officially signed the contract to buy the 25 Australian Hornets. Do you feel that they've ignored your advice in the report?
Oh. As I mentioned, the decision to purchase Australian jets is a government decision based on government departmental information.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to come back to report number 3 and compare that to the 2012 spring report, the fighter jet replacement program at that time that was done by the AG. And you looked at everything at that point in time through the office of sole sourcing, life cycle costs, the policy itself, and as well as the Joint Strike Fighter Memorandum of Understanding. And then we look at this report where we are talking about sole source of used fighter jets, no comment. We are looking at, a plane that is used and needs to be upgraded, but yet we don't talk about life cycle costs. I'm just wondering why there's a double standard.
At the time of the audit, there had been no decision to buy the Australian jets, so we focused on the areas that we thought we were going to be most helpful to Parliament and to National Defence, to look at the risks facing the current fleet to determine whether or not it was going to be in a position to continue with the current CF-18 fleet until a replacement fleet came in. There was no decision to buy Australian jets or other jets at that time, so essentially there was nothing for us to audit.
So what would be the nexus then to require the proper evaluation of the new life extension program as well as the purchase of these Australian scrap metal?
So in terms of our audit process, as I mentioned earlier, we look at the different risks.
I'm talking about going forward.
Moving forward. Once again, our audit plan is evolving, and we will once again look at all of the issues facing the department and determine what the right audit is to carry out.
Because as a parliamentarian, I'll say it doesn't give me confidence when I see the way an in-depth dive is done on one report versus another one here that doesn't have the same depth of study nor the same type of evaluation of different mechanisms being employed by the government to either create an artificial or manufactured operational discourse and stress within our Royal Canadian Air Force, or the aircraft that they're going to bring in that will make things worse instead of better for our pilots and our air crew.
And just on that as well, a supplementary, when you did the audit, was the Hornet still in the mix? So that everything was done on it. That was the life operation that you did that?
So in terms of the decision to buy the Super Hornet, once again, that decision had not been made. It wasn't a final decision of government. So once again, we looked at the analysis that the department prepared, both in determining whether or not it was going to buy the Super Hornet, and in that case, it demonstrated that what it needed was more personnel. With respect to the Australian jet, once again, the decision had not been made by government, so there was no information in terms of the cost that it was going to take to audit.
Mr. Bertolet.
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll just reiterate something we often say to members, is that we always take members' concerns and suggestions into account as we go forward and determine which audits we will do next.
Writing to you.
Was that it?